Hello, horror fans. Welcome back to Jay versus Horror. Excuse me. Already with that. That's great. Mm, we got the cure, though. Good old Colombian coffee. How's it going, guys? Now, tonight, we reached out to all the members in the Jay versus Horror Facebook group. Make sure you check it out if you haven't been there yet. And we asked them to name a horror film that held a special place in their heart and to kind of give us some of their stories about those films. And so I think we're going to have a great show tonight. You guys are going to hear some great stories. We want to get your comments too. So give us your comments live and let us know about horror movies that have a special place in your heart and why they have a special place in your heart. Maybe there's a story behind it. Maybe it's the first horror movie you saw, or you saw it with someone you really care about, or we've got some great stories for you guys. I was really impressed with the stories these guys have for the movies. So let's get back to the beginning. We got a lot of comments to look at, and got to get back to the beginning. Click all the way back. All right. Let me see if I can make this work. All right. Our first comment comes from Jay Dredd. And Jay says, Return of the Living Dead, because the characters were awesome and the story was too. Zombies were much cooler back then. I don't know if they were much cooler back then, man, but I really appreciate that comment. They were like, I like Return of the Living Dead. I remember going to a panel about that movie, and it was funny because the convention where they were having the panel, George Romero was at that convention, right? And a couple of the actors made comments about how they had all gotten on the elevator to come down to the convention room at the same time he did, and he wouldn't talk to them or even look at them to that day. So I thought that was funny. But yeah, it's a great movie. I like Return of the Living Dead, Return of the Living Dead 2, and Part 3, all for different reasons. So great comment there from Jay Dredd. We're moving on. Douglas Loparetto says Evil Dead 2013, dealing with a family member who suffers from addiction for 12 plus years. This movie speaks to me in hopes that one day she'll overcome it. Plus, I absolutely love how gory it is. So, yeah, not every movie touches everyone on the same level, right? Not everyone's special memory of a movie comes from a great memory, right? But still interesting. Yeah, and I can see that too. That it does deal with addiction. You know, recently, this doesn't have anything to do with horror, but I read the other day where they canceled the show Mom on CBS. And Mom's a pretty funny show, but it's got a lot to do with addicts and stuff like that. And then, you know, a couple days after they announced that they were canceling that show, a huge petition popped up. And I never really thought about it, but a lot of people said that this show helped them through their addiction and through their recovery and stuff like that. And so maybe CBS is going to consider keeping the show. They lost the lead actress, Anna Faris, of course, from the scary movies. So then we worked it back around to horror, right? From the scary movie franchise, Anna Faris, yeah. She was the lead in Mom, or one of the leads. Allison Janney's also the lead. And she left this year, so they were kind of just going to let it go after this year, but maybe they'll keep it going. That doesn't have anything to do with horror, but it's interesting, you know, that people can get that much out of something. And our next comment comes from Kevin Patterson. American Werewolf in London, as well as being my favorite film of all time. I remember my uncle renting it from the local video store and my mom saying I couldn't watch it. I was only 6. My mom went home and left me at Gran's for a sleepover. And when Gran went to bed, my uncle let me downstairs to watch it. I have since easily watched it well over 100 times, full on nostalgia every time I see it, and it will always be my number one movie. American Werewolf is a great movie, guys. I love that one. And so that's a great story there. And I said, thank God for aunts and uncles, right? Because I had an aunt like that who would let me come over to her house and watch movies that my mom and dad wouldn't let me watch. She let me watch the first time I saw Phantasm. I didn't see Phantasm first. I saw Phantasm 2. It used to play on HBO all the time because Phantasm 2 was done by a different studio than the rest of them. That's why when you find them free someplace, you'll never find Phantasm 2 there with the rest of them. But yeah, I remember her inviting me over and let me watch that. She showed me The Exorcist for the first time when I was running my mouth about how I wasn't scared of stuff, how movies didn't scare me. She showed me The Exorcist and then left me alone in her house the next day to scare the hell out of me. So yeah, My Aunt Devona. So if you're out there, Aunt Devona, and you're listening, or if you see this, I love you and thank you very much for helping with my horror movie education. I think Kevin feels the same way about his uncle. And he says also, he mentions in there, like when we're having a back and forth here, he says that it could have went the other way, right? Like he could have just been so terrified that he never watched another horror movie again, but it had the opposite effect. And Kevin Pishkin says Stitches, and this is a great story, guys. Stitches, I'll explain my fascination. My favorite subgenre of horror is evil clowns. When Stitches first arrived, I was in the middle of learning how to walk again after being stabbed in the L5S1 by someone trying to kill me in my old profession. I believe that's the he's talking about vertebrae L5S1. Um, I was living in a daily grind that was tough to accept and continue on with. But that night, I watched Stitches from my bed, and for the first time in a year and a half, I laughed. Stitches helped me find my smile. Another year later, I was walking again, and sadly, it's a true story. I don't think it's sad. I mean, things happen in life, but the good part about it is you recovered, man. And it's great that you found something to help you get your smile back because I've been knocked out of commission before, and I know how hard that can be, especially when you consider yourself to be a virile person and you're not used to having to, take a break or sit on the sidelines. It can be really hard. You start to question your self worth and all that stuff. Crazy stuff goes through your head. So, you know, sad that it happened, but all in all, it's a great story, and I'm glad you were able to help. A movie was able to help you get your smile back. And I said, I'm glad you got back on your feet, brother. And he said, me too. I'm glad. I bet he is. Uh, and I have a few guys, but I'm saving them for later. I'm gonna do a few of mine later. I've kind of talked about my aunt a little bit already, so that was fun. Um, our next one comes from Dr. Shock Dave Becker from the Horror Movie Podcast. He also does Land of the Creeps. Dave does Considering the Cinema. He stops by here occasionally. Dr. Shock Dave Becker won the Silver Bolo Award from Joe Bob Briggs last year for being one of the best horror content creators out there, and we love him. He says, Jay Poltergeist. I went to the theater with a bunch of buddies on a gorgeous summer day in 1982, and somehow it managed to scare the hell out of all of us. So, yeah, great comment there from Dr. Shock, Dave Becker. Now, up next, we have Russell De Silva. Russell is a badass, man. This guy has interviewed everybody under the sun, big stars like Christian Bale. He's a big deal in Bollywood. Like, I see him all the time on his page, not just like a picture with somebody, but like talking to them, doing interviews with the biggest stars in India. And he says, Psycho, my all time favorite horror movie. Classic Hitchcock beginning where you're taken down another path in the beginning and then lured into a false sense of calm before the nightmare is unleashed. Mastery and suspense where you're challenged against your better judgment into almost believing that Norman Bates isn't the predator. Edge of your seat tension, genius camera work and background score, and a slasher that's yet to be topped after all these years, in my opinion. Plus one that delved deep into the killer's depraved psyche while also being entertaining and chilling, and the denotement of one of the best ever filmed. Just a brilliant amalgamation of art and entertaining, uniting for quality, or in entertainment, uniting for quality cinema. Uh, was fortunate enough to watch it in the theater a couple years ago. That's awesome. As part of a Alfred Hitchcock showcase after owning and having repeatedly watched the DVD at home. I love Psycho, man. And I love that beginning of course. It's one of those few movies where people say, you got to see this, you got to see this. It's a cornerstone movie. And then when you watch it, you're like, damn, yeah, it is that good. And also, I had this idea a few years ago of writing a book about people's experiences with seeing a movie for the first time in a theater. And I just would love to interview somebody who walked into the theater in 1960 with no idea what they were about to see and watch Psycho, and like to hear their, experience, what that was like watching this guy stumble down those fruit steps at the end dressed as his mother. I mean, that had to blow people's minds. I'm sure there's other great experiences people have had that would be great to write about, like The Exorcist, Silence of the Lambs, movies like that. I think that would be a fun book. I may get around to that someday. Let's look at some of our comments over here. Timothy Fate says Reanimator. That's a true classic. Brandon Barker says Bloody Moon from the late great Jess Franco. I have no idea why this movie always stands out to me. It's completely inept. The dialogue is questionable, but it seems to have some type of charm. You know what? We actually have that movie right here on the channel for free, Brandon. If anybody wants to check out the movie that Brandon's talking about, it is right here on the channel for free. And I agree with you, Brandon. It does have a certain amount of charm. Just Franco has a certain amount of charm. He's generally a very sleazy director who didn't make a lot of great films. But yeah, there is a certain amount of charm to him, and this is one of his better ones. Uh, and Amy A. Ramirez says Phantasm. Savini Jason Reviews says my all-time favorite horror film would be Night of the Comet. It had thrills, suspense, comedy, and action. That's a great one. Good pick there, guys. Uh, so we got some more here. Emily Dunlap says Dawn of the Dead. It was my favorite movie, and I watched it every day in fourth grade. My dad would have to re-rent it every 3 days for a whole year. And then she laughs, ha ha ha. Yeah, it sounds like your dad probably should have just bought you that for your birthday, Emily. Although it might have been odd giving you a Dawn of the Dead VHS at your fourth grade birthday party, right? I mean, however old you are, the other parents might have been like Dawn of the Dead, but who cares what the other parents think, right? Steve Morgan says, I have to mention three because I don't recall the order in which I saw them. All three played a pivotal role in my love of horror. I saw them all on network TV at a young age. Shivers, of course, from David Cronenberg. Burnt Offerings. We all know about Burnt Offerings. It's one that's ingrained in a lot of people's minds. And Demon Seed. And man, I am glad you mentioned Demon Seed. What a great movie based on the book by Dean Koontz. I'm assuming now there's a couple titles Demon Seed. I'm assuming you're talking about the one with Julie Christie. Yeah, that movie scared the crap out of me when I was a kid because basically it's about a robot rapist. I don't know if you guys have seen the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror, but they do like a little parody on it where they also kind of mix the Hal. What's his name? Hal. Oh my God. Hal 3000 is Hal 3000 guys or Hal 9000, whatever it is. Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey. They kind of mix those premises together into a parody of that, and that's what this is about. Like this guy is a. It's been a while since I've seen it, but this guy's like a computer genius, and he builds an AI thing that operates his whole house. And when he leaves his wife there by herself, this thing becomes obsessed with her. So it's kind of like Misery, and it tries to impregnate her with a half human, half AI child. It's a crazy ass movie. Great picks there, Steve. Nathan Bartlebaugh from the Phantom Galaxy, guys. Check out the Phantom Galaxy. They have some great uh, episodes about all different kinds of movies. They don't just focus on horror or sci-fi. They'll talk about anything that's on the fringe, even if it's fantasy or anything like that. So Nathan says, seems too simple, but the original Fright Night. Prior to seeing this, we had a pretty strange single guy move into the big sprawling house next to us. Okay. We live pretty rural. I hate that word. Rurally. So no one else very close. I thought his habits were weird to begin with, and my monster kid brain started overreacting. And then I saw this movie, luckily later that year, after tagging along with my parents on false pretense so I could snoop through this house. It became clear that he was just a lonely guy who was out of touch. He was having issues adjusting to life in the woods, or at least that's what he managed to get me to think. Okay. That's interesting, right? I mean, can you imagine? That's kind of like, because Fright Night is kind of like a Rear Window thing, right? It's kind of like a Hitchcock Rear Window thing where you're seeing this unfold and nobody believes you. And I kind of liked it in the remake when they had Tony Collette, kind of eventually be like, oh, wait, this is my kid. Hold on. He's not lying. And so I enjoyed that. But yeah, can you imagine somebody moving in next door to you, like right after you saw that movie and being a creepy guy and all that stuff? That would be crazy, right? Some things almost seem like they're supposed to be that way. And Nathan was probably supposed to be a horror fan, and that's probably one of the experiences that was supposed to push him down that path. Eric Whiting. Jay. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original, was one of the first horror films I found scary and effective to such a degree that I wanted to watch it repeatedly for a while. And man, I totally understand that sentiment as well. When I first found the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, now, when I was a kid, my dad was a cinephile. He had 1,000 movies, probably. We had so many movies. We had movies on a shelf in the kitchen, and he recorded movies off Stars and HBO. He was pirating before people knew what pirating was, right? Well, most people were back then, right? But so one day I started to notice that, when certain people would come over, they would ask to borrow a movie. And then certain people would ask to borrow specific movies. And I started to notice that my dad would go into his bedroom to get some of these movies. And he was very sneaky about it. So I thought, what are they getting at? What are they getting? And of course, every time I tell the story, everybody thinks this is going to end in porn, but it doesn't. But yeah, so I snuck into my dad's room after he went to work one day, and I found this little drawer underneath the bed, and it had videotapes in it. And ladies and gentlemen, this is where I discovered the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Hellraiser, Deliverance, 100 more great films like that my dad didn't put out on the shelf for us to be able to have access to. And when I found that tape, I probably snuck it in and out of that room 100 times watching it, because it was a tape too. It wasn't the actual VHS. It was like a tape of a tape or something. And it was so grainy, and the tracking was so bad that it just almost felt like it was something real, something you shouldn't be watching, like a crime tape or something. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, Texas Chainsaw stuck with me on that level too. And he also says in another comment, Candyman has a special place for me. While I didn't see it until 2010, I remember the artwork having a strong impact on me in 1993 when it was on the shelf at the video store. 4-year-old me was very curious about the box cover and what the movie was about. That's awesome, because I think we all have movies like that you remember from when you were a kid. You remember going to the video store with your mom and dad, and you would try to like glance at that section, at that shelf, and you would get images in your mind, and you always had these ideas about the movies that were in those boxes, whether they were true or not, because the artwork. But yeah, and I love Candyman too. Everybody knows I love Tony Todd, dude. He's just a fascinating person. If you ever get a chance to meet him, he's very charismatic, and the guy always has that Shakespearean delivery like he does in Candyman. It's very Incubus, Dracula type thing. And yeah, cool stuff. And Matt Rawlings from Father and Son Watch Horror Movies. Check out that podcast, guys. Great podcast. I was on there with them a couple months ago talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And he says, Jay, Psycho changed my life. I moved to Hollywood to try and be a filmmaker because of that movie. So that's 2 shout outs for Psycho tonight. And we are moving on. Scott Workman says, Jason Lives, because it was the first Friday the 13th movie I ever saw. And Jaws, first horror film my parents ever introduced me to. And then Randy Spurlock, one of our moderators at J versus Horror, she's a cool chick. She says she's seconding Jaws because her dad showed it to her when she was maybe 5, and she had loved horror ever since, right? So great comments so far. Let's take a look at what's going on with the live feed. Neko 2. See, the names are always crazy on YouTube, right? Because everybody has an alias. It's not like Tom, or Bob Johnson. It's like horrormoviestranglers.com or something like that. You know what I mean? But this is Neko 2, and it says video violence 1 and 2. Pie lover. Why would I want to go a day without saying pie lover? The evil, it had the evil. Okay. It was filmed close by, but many movies filmed here: Red Dawn original and No Country for Old Men. Steve Morgan says, yes, the one with Julie. And Brandon Barker says, most people do discover porn doing that, Jay. Yes, I know. And that's why, like, I've told that story to people before, and I can start to see the anxiety rise in their face. Like, why is Jay? It's like a TMI story where someone's telling you a story and you're like, I just trying to drink my coffee, buddy. You know what I mean? I don't want to hear about this. But it didn't end that way. And yeah, there's always that. People are always making that comment about, horror movies start this way. And then they say, well, pornos do too. I think it's from Detroit Rock City, right? That's where that quote actually comes from, but there's a lot of memes about that. George Rogers says, how's it going, Jay? How's it going, George? Guys, go check out George's podcast, 007 podcast. Why? It's a Station 007, I believe is what it's called. And yeah, great stuff. If you like James Bond stuff, I'm a big James Bond fan myself. Uh, and George is the man when it comes to that. You know, they say you're always supposed to have a guy for everything, right? Well, if I ever have a James Bond question on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, I can guarantee you that George Rogers is getting a phone call. First off, the first thing that's gonna happen is I'm gonna be mad at myself for not knowing it. You know what I mean? But then I'm gonna be like, can I get George on the phone? So let's take a look here at some of the other ones. Wesley Jones from Real Talk, guys. Real Talk has been out for about a year now. They're a great horror podcast. They're trying to get their 10,000 downloads before April. So head on over to Real Talk. Give them a listen. Give them a download. Let's help these guys out. Let's spread the love in the community. Wesley says, Jay, I'm going with a little known film called Haunted Ween. One of the first movies about a haunted house attraction where people are actually in real danger. It was made in the late 80s by a gentleman from my hometown. It's the only movie he ever made. It's not what I would consider a good movie, but it's super entertaining. So bad it's good even in some places. But the man behind the movie's name is Doug Robertson, and he passed away earlier this year from cancer. I've honored him before on Land of the Creeps, Hometown Horrors episode. This longtime partner whom I worked with has now taken over selling the remaining copies of his DVDs. It's a really fun watch, and just know a good man was behind it. That's an awesome story, man. And that's what it's really all about, right? The great stories. That's what we really want. And so there's a great story there from Wesley Jones. Now I'm going to tell a story here, guys. And this one's not about a horror movie, but it's a very heartfelt story that I'm going to share with you. Um, so earlier this year, like back in December, Wesley and Real Talk, they did an episode on Die Hard, and is it a Christmas movie? And they talked about it, and they got pretty good in depth about it, and they had a good time. And so I listened to that episode, and I realized something. My dad and I, this was something that we did every year at Christmas. Every year at Christmas, we would get together and watch Die Hard. Now, we weren't always best friends. We butted heads a lot. He was pretty stubborn, stuck in his ways, and I am too. And so we didn't always get along, but it was one of those things where we could always get along watching it, right? Every Christmas, we knew we were going to watch Die Hard together. And he passed away in 2014. He died in his sleep, unfortunately. Apparently, we found out later on that he knew he was sick, but he didn't tell any of us because he didn't want us to know or worry. And then he ended up passing away in his sleep without, you know, I'm thankful he passed away in his sleep because he went without any, major complications. But at the same time, it just hit us all very hard because we had no idea it was coming. And so when I watched this episode, something dawned on me. I realized that, or when I listened to Wesley's episode about Die Hard, I realized that I hadn't watched that movie in 7 years, since my dad died, since the Christmas before my dad died, that I hadn't watched that movie, and that it was one of my favorite movies, one of the movies I've seen the most. And I'd gone all this time without, and I didn't know that I'd done it on purpose. I think it was a subconscious thing, right? And so yeah, I'm Irish. I got the Johnny Walker out and had a few drinks about a week before Christmas and watched Die Hard and got it all out and felt great about it. And I really appreciated it. I know that that's not why they made that episode, but it helped me out a great deal. And it's something that I never realized, an emotional connection that I had to a film. And yeah, so there you go. The funny thing about it was about a month and a half after my dad died, this guy got a hold of me and asked me if I knew anyone named Rick and Rick Wall. And I said, yeah, he was my dad. He just passed away. And he was like, man, I was on an aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise with you in the 70s, and we were best friends. And man, he sent me all these pictures of my dad on the USS Enterprise when he was in the Navy. And it was like a whole nother side of this man that I didn't know existed. And I got to learn all these great stories about him. So it was a cool thing. That's neither here nor there, but just an interesting side bit. Let's move on. Our next one. Let's see what we have here on the live. I'm probably boring everybody to death with my stories here. Nothing. So we're still in a good spot on the live. All right. we're getting a decent audience. We'll take it. People are moving in and out. People are mingling. So Joe Cordero says the thing, and he just simply put the thing. He didn't have a story that he wanted to share. But James Deadpool Phillips says Dawn of the Dead, just like Emily. First time I fell in love with horror and makeup effects, and some guy called Tom Savini. I think you guys might know him. The film had everything in it. It was so good. It made me want to stay in a shopping mall as an adult, something I am yet to do, but one day will. DeAndre Walker says, I could probably pull like 10 to 20 movies out of my hat here, but the horror film I look back on most fondly is Demon Knight. That's a great movie. I love that movie from my childhood, or not my childhood, more like, right before I was an adult. It was the first film I had seen as a kid that had a black final girl. Yeah, Geraldine or Geraldine. I thought it was Jill, might be Jill. And a film that wasn't black centric. That's true. And she was given a full character arc. She was a criminal who found a greater purpose through the trauma of her situation. It was a character I recognized from my everyday life. Geraldine was my cousin and my aunt, and a lot of the young women I went to school with. She got to play the role of the final girl without someone pointing out she was black and should have been dead by the second act. It was such a formative experience. I'll agree with that, man. That's an awesome story there, man. That's really cool. Yeah, I mean, I noticed that too. Like when I was watching it, that I think just Jada Pinkett Smith was such a good actor that it never dawned on me like, okay, they're making a movie with a black final girl. I never thought about it like that. I just thought that it's she's just a great actress. I never considered it as a race thing or whatever. But I would imagine if I were black and I saw that, yes, that would be very impactful. So that's a great story, uh, man. And she was just so, I hate to say it, but she was so sexy in that movie, right? Let's just put it out there. She was incredibly sexy in Demon Knight. Also, Nutty Professor, she was pretty sexy in that too. Dave Whitebread says mine was Munchies because I was afraid of horror movies back then. I didn't see Gremlins and Critters until after I saw Munchies. I still revisit Munchies from time to time. Yeah, that's kind of like it's kind of like the generic brand, right? If you went to the store and they had Hydrox and Oreos and then, Sam's, well, Gremlins would be Oreos, Critters would be Hydrox, and Munchies would be Sam's Choice. Maybe along with, what's the other ones? The Ghoulies? Ursino Garcia Hernandez says, my first girlfriend introduced me to the film Brain Scan when I was 16. It was her favorite film. She had rented it so many times. I asked the video shop if I could buy it off them as a gift for my girlfriend, as at the time it had no official release. They complied, and my girlfriend was elated. Within a year, she had found a copy of Brain Scan in another rental shop and bought it for me so I could have my own copy too. That's awesome. I still own it today, and without a shadow of a doubt, it is the VHS I have played the most, especially turning other people onto the film. Good times. That was a fun movie, right? I always thought it felt like the like ugly brother of Little Monsters or something, right? With Howie Mandel and Fred Savage. But in this one, the thing is evil and the kid is slightly older and a little bit more of a problem, right? Edward Furlong. But yeah, I like that movie too. I wondered why they never made a sequel to that. Maybe somebody can hit us up with that, why they never made a sequel to Brain Scan. Matthew Hall says Army of Darkness, VHS 1993. That was the year for me when I was around 13 or 14. I used to stay over at my friend's house, and eventually his parents started to let us stay out in a little travel trailer they had for hunting. His mom would take us to the video store to rent whatever we wanted. Boy, oh boy, was it fun to be out in a small country town on a Friday night with a bunch of horror movies to watch, feeling like you are the only ones in the world during those few hours of horror. Then we would go out all night into the morning doing boy stuff. Just great times I will never forget. Army of Darkness will always be that film that takes me back to that day. Awesome. Leah McLaughlin says The Shining. So watched it a couple years ago. Creepy as ever. I go to bed that night and have this awful dream that my father died. Extremely vivid. I even talked about it. I don't discuss my dreams very much. A few days later, I post some pic related to the movie. My dad comments and says he just visited Colorado. I was not aware of this. And he visited the hotel. You guessed it. It was the Stanley Hotel. That's kind of creepy, Leah. Yeah, I love The Shining. It came out the year I was born. That's part of it, probably. Also, just I'm a big Stanley Kubrick fan ever since 2001, or the first time I saw 2001: A Space Odyssey. Big Stanley Kubrick fan. Also a big Stephen King fan, and I'm one of the few people I think, maybe like Leah here, who love both versions. I love the book, but I also love Stanley Kubrick's version. I think they're both geniuses, and you can't expect geniuses to agree on everything. Stephen is a master in his medium, which is the written word, and Stanley was a master in his medium, which was film and showing things visually instead of, letting people live it out through their imagination. So I appreciate both versions, and yeah, that's great. That's weird though, Leah. If you have any dreams about me or anything like that, if you see like maybe like a thinner situation for me, maybe like a gypsy coming up and she like rubs her finger on my head and says fatter instead of thinner, please let me know. I need to know that kind of stuff. I don't want to be caught off guard. And Jay Dredd comes back and says, The Exorcist, when I was a kid, I had my buddy sleep over and we were watching The Exorcist in the basement. The basement was cold and dark. The lights were off. And there was nothing but the big box TV shining Reagan's face made up of rotted flesh. Yeah, I still see that. Occasionally. It doesn't happen as much as it did back in the day. But right after I saw it, I gave the story about my aunt showing it to me earlier. That was my major problem with it, was I could not get, all the crazy stuff that happens in that movie is what it is, but it was her face that bothered me the most. And when I close my eyes, sometimes to this very day, I'll think, okay, I'm going to go to sleep now. And I'll close my eyes. Reagan, I'm done. I'm done. We got to watch Everybody Loves Raymond or The Office or something for a little while because I can't go to sleep right now. And he says, we could not see a thing. And in the dark, it had to creep into the back. I had to creep into the back room to check the fuse box after tracking down a flashlight. I swear to this day, my grandfather was the prankster. I never shit myself so bad in my life. God rest his soul. That's a great story, man. I think that movie got a lot of people. Willis Wheeler says, the first Blair Witch Project. I had just moved out of the house in my first apartment with my first girlfriend, and she was scared from the ending. So I used to just stand in the corner with my back turned to scare the hell. What a sick person you are, Willis. I told the story the other day that I actually kind of did something similar like this with my girlfriend at the time when it came out. I tried to scare her real bad. I used some information I had, she didn't, and took her to the theater to see it, told her it was real, even though I knew it wasn't, but they were like promoting it that way. And by the time that movie was over, by the time we got to the parking lot, I could just tell by the look on her face that I had to tell her that the movie was not real because it was affecting her at that moment already. She thought she just actually seen something that was real. And it was terrifying. And that's my argument about the Blair Witch Project all the time when people say it's too slow or it's boring or this or that. I'm like, man, I'm not buying it. If that happened to you, you'd be terrified. And if you say you wouldn't, you are lying. Okay. If that was real and that was happening to you, you would be absolutely terrified. Unless you were drunk, maybe. Uh, Martin Fleming says Event Horizon, seeing it on the big screen was the last thing me and my dad did together. Oh, man. I'm going to tell a story about Event Horizon. It's not, it doesn't have anything to like emotional tie like that, but I remember it very specifically because I took a girl on a date to see this movie, right? It was our first date. We go in, we're going to watch Event Horizon. I had no idea what it was. I knew it was a space horror movie. No idea what the plot is, how it's going to play out or anything like that. So we go in there and we start to watch the movie. And as the movie goes on, the girl keeps trying to talk to me, and I'm like, what are you doing? I'm like, are you watching this or what? I'm like, this is amazing. This is one of the best horror movies I've ever seen. And she's like, and I knew right then that she was not the girl for me and that there was no need to take her on a second date, right? As a matter of fact, I think after we left the theater, I was such an asshole that I took her home and walked her to her. I did walk her to her door, but I got back in my truck and left, and I went to Taco Bell by myself instead of taking her out to eat. I was like, why waste the money? I mean, like, the girl didn't like Event Horizon, okay? It was a done deal. And I remember also, like, when I was in at Taco Bell, in the line waiting for my food. They came over the radio and they announced that they were playing. What is the name of that group? Counting Crows. Mr. Jones, and then they cut right into the song and came on the radio and said that Princess Diana had just been killed in an accident in England, and so it stuck in my mind for that, But it mostly stuck in my mind because it blew my mind. Event Horizon is a great movie. What was wrong with that girl? Still don't feel bad about that. Um, yeah, and a couple people had to tell him how wrong he was on that. Rika Williams. Rika says Nightmare on Elm Street. This was my favorite horror movie. I was 4 or 5 when I seen this at my mom's, my grandma's house, and with my mom. Okay. I think she messed up there, but anyway, it says her grandma's house in the basement. While my sister and brothers would be outside, I'll be the only one in the basement in the dark, sitting on the couch watching that movie, eating popcorn. But it was something about the boiler room that creeped me out. Yeah, man, that creeped me out too, Rika. Like the boiler room scene with Freddy. Uh, I was never scared of Freddy though. I mean, like I always had a pretty good sense about like what's real and what's not, even when I was younger. So like that was how I got lured into that Exorcist thing because I was running my mouth around my cousins how I wasn't scared of anything. I'm like, oh, I've seen all the Freddys, I've seen all the Jasons. Those aren't real. Those guys aren't real. They're not really gonna kill you. But I'm not religious now. Okay, but I was back then when this happened, and because I was raised in a religious family, until I got away from that, I didn't, change my views. But back then, I very much believed in the devil and demons and things like that. And The Exorcist presented an interesting challenge for me because it became here is something that if you believe in it, then you have to acknowledge that it could really happen. And not only could it really happen, but Jesus, this is the most terrifying movie out of all the movies I've seen. And you're telling me this could really happen and that you don't even have to believe in the devil for him to just come and snatch your ass out of reality and make you do all these things that make all these things happen to you. Yeah, it got me pretty good psychologically, and then of course the Reagan face thing. Now in later years, I've seen that movie. I watch it at least once a year. I try to watch it a couple times a year, but Regina hates it, so I have to watch it whenever. And so I get more and more out of it now than I used to back then. It's a very interesting theological discussion, I think, the whole film. And I like how it questions itself, right? There are things in the film that don't make sense. When like where he knows that the demon is lying and stuff, or that, something's not quite right about what's happening there. And so yeah, I think there's a lot to take apart about that movie other than just once you get past the shock stuff, you put that out of your mind. I don't even care about that stuff anymore. I just fast forward through that, skip through that, whatever. It's the acting and the story and just the way the whole thing is shot and what there's missing pieces to the movie that of course they call it a cursed film, but whatever. Let's move on. Our next comment comes from Ken Miner, and Ken says one of my first scary movies at the time. It had a pretty big impact on me. Nowadays, to others, it doesn't have much interest, and it's called One Dark Night. I don't think I've seen that one, man. You may have actually hit me with something here I have not seen. It happens occasionally. I'm I can't say it doesn't. Every now and then somebody will just pull one out, and I'm like, nope, never seen it. No, it doesn't bother me so much if I've heard of it and I've chosen not to pay attention to it that much, or like I'm like, yeah, I put it in 3 or 4 times, but I never got into it, so I can't say I know everything about it or whatever. But sometimes when somebody just hits me with one, I'm like, I've never heard of it, I've never seen it. How did that happen? You know what I mean? Usually nothing gets through my net like that, but every now and then it happens. Rourke Devereaux. And Rourke is from Evil Jelly, another fun podcast, guys. They are awesome. Check out Evil Jelly. He says Pet Cemetery and Maximum Overdrive. Growing up, my cousins and I lived off NC Highway 131 just before a blind bend. 18-wheelers would tear ass around that bend. And honestly, as a kid, they were frightening. My grandmother would yell at us kids as we played in the front yard, "You boys stay away from that road." She would say it with such conviction and fear, you believe semi trucks would drive off the road and go after us. That's funny. After watching Pet Cemetery, so we see this tie in here, right, guys? Because Gage gets killed in Pet Cemetery, and then in Maximum Overdrive, the trucks are, they're people say they're alive. They're not really alive. They're being controlled by some kind of space magic from aliens, right? And but he says after watching Pet Cemetery and witnessing the scene with little uh, Gabe, I think it's Gage. He says, I was forever terrified, even more of that highway. It stuck with me. Then my grandmother would say, don't let what happened to Gage happen to you. Oh, man, that's a good one. That is a good one, man. Guess that's why Maximum Overdrive always terrified me and why it's one of my all time favorite movies. I believe horror is relative to our life experiences. You are absolutely right, my friend. I totally love that story. I will tell you this. Maximum Overdrive is one of the first ones I remember my dad being like, "Your mom's not around, fuck it," you know. I mean, and let me watch that movie. And I remember very clearly, I was 7 years old the first time I saw that movie. The next day, because I had to wait for the bus each day, right? So the next day, I'm outside waiting for the bus, and you start like out of the corner of your eye, you're looking at the car that's parked in the driveway, huh? You're like, because it seems ridiculous. You would be scared of this concept. It's so off the wall that aliens are going to send a comet in, kind of like a broom that's going to make these machines start acting on their own or give them some kind of, I call it space alien magic. I don't know what you call it. I mean, they're not really alive. They don't have a heartbeat. There's nothing biological about them, right? But they are controlling themselves because of space alien magic. And yeah, that it eerie me, you know, it creeped me out a little bit. 7 years old, standing out there in the driveway after watching Maximum Overdrive, and I'm like, huh? And cars look like that anyway. When you look at the front of a car, and you got Christine too, by the way. When you look at the front of a car, the headlights are kind of like the eyes. The grill can be like the mouth, and if you let your imagination run, sometimes that grill starts to just you're like, ah. But yeah, great story there, man. Uh, George Rogers says the trucks are controlled by Stephen King cocaine magic. That's right, buddy. That's exactly what they were controlled by. Stephen King cocaine magic. Stephen King, he wanted he said that he wanted oh come on, Bruce Springsteen. He wrote the role for a bill for Bruce Springsteen, right? And the studio just looked at him like, you're nuts. They're like, he's never acted before, he's just done music videos. We're not they were taking a chance on this anyway. Stephen King, first time director, and the studio said, "Look, we're going to let you do whatever you want to do, Stephen, but we want to put Emilio Estevez in this movie because he's a proven hit right now. He's hot with the young kids, and it gives us a guaranteed draw whether the rest of your crap works or not, right? Whether what you're doing works or not, we have a guy from the Breakfast Club. We could put him in this movie." And so Stephen King said from that moment on, from the moment they made him use Emilio Estevez, he just checked out and it became a like cocaine. He admits to it, right? And so yeah, great great comment there, George. Uh, Dorian Quintana says, I love the movie Needful Things. Leland Gaunt is what my nightmares are made of. You gotta love Max von Sydow in that movie, right? I just did a tribute to him the other day and called him one of the greatest badasses in horror movie history because this guy kicked a demon's ass and then came back and played the devil years later in Needful Things. He's also played several other roles that were great in the genre and around the genre. But yeah, Leland Gaunt. I like Leland Gaunt. I always felt like, there's got to be, of course, they're all connected through Stephen King, but Randall Flagg, Leland Gaunt, and Andre Lenoge from Storm of the Century, I believe they're cousins, right? They seem like they have to be related somehow. They're all uh, vampire, wizard, assholes, or whatever the hell they are, demonic, whatever. They're not exactly the devil, right? But they have some kind of weird powers. Steven Pazienza says, hey, what's up? Everyone just got home. It's horror time. That's right. And George says, explains why Emilio was dressed like the boss. Yes, that was it. The whole character was designed around Bruce Springsteen. The, handkerchief in the back pocket, the blue jeans, blue collar, cool guy, right? I thought it would have been interesting to see Bruce Springsteen in it, but I'm a huge Emilio fan. I mean, I jocked that guy's style hard when that movie came out. I mean, I was 7 then, but even later on, like 12, 13, 14, Emilio Estevez was in Young Guns 2 and all that stuff. I was a huge Emilio Estevez fan. Uh, George is on the other page, and he says on the other page, "This is an odd choice, but for me, it's a Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, The Dream Master. My sister took me to see this in the theaters when I was 4 years old. Freddy did scare me a little, but I was just captivated by him. He was witty, but also deadly, and for some reason, I really liked that. This movie started my love of horror, and I don't know if I'd be as big a horror fan as I am now without having seen this movie so early on." That's awesome, man. I remember watching part 5 with my cousins. I don't know, it wasn't the first one I saw or anything like that, but I just remember watching it with my cousin. I had one older cousin, right? We all did, right? I had one older cousin. She was 19 and she was super cool. She was like the prettiest girl at our school and all this other stuff. She got away with murder. And so, yeah, she was supposed to be babysitting us one weekend and she rented, uh, I think it was part 5, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, and maybe like Lethal Weapon 2 or something like that, something like that. And kind of just like try to get us to stay in the bedroom while she was off with her boyfriend in the whatever they were doing, right? And but my cousin had a little TV in her bedroom, and we sat there and watched the movies. I think there was another movie too. It might have been like Roadhouse or something. Just weird, random stuff that she rented for us. And yeah, it was kind of creepy watching that. See, I think I was probably 10 when that came out. JD Park says House of a Thousand Corpses, of course. Also, The Exorcist for different reasons at different times. That's a good point. Yeah, because you can get a lot out of The Exorcist. Um, wait, George says I meant the Dream Child. Did I say it wrong? Oh yeah, because part 4 was Dream Mastered, part 5 was Dream Child. Sorry, that's my bad, man. I should have caught it. I just reading through without paying attention uh, to what my lips are doing. You know what I mean? And he says, oh, Dorian Quintana says, "How about the soundtrack? All AC/DC. I love that." You know what's really funny about that, man? Or I don't know, Dorian. Don't you might be female, you might be male. I don't know. I just say man to everybody, or buddy, or guy, and stuff like that. I don't mean anything by it. But you know what's cool about that is that if you go back and watch the trailer for Maximum Overdrive, they had not completed that deal with AC/DC yet when they put the trailer out. So they straight up stole the music from Halloween 3, and the music from Halloween 3 is what's playing in the trailer for Maximum Overdrive. Go watch it, guys. If you get a chance, watch it online. It's the trailer where Stephen King is in the trailer, and he's like talking about how they say if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. You know what I mean? And then they show a little bit of the film, chopped up like they did in trailers back then, and it just has the Halloween 3 music laid over it. It's really weird, uh, especially when you're expecting who made who. You know, Angel Luis Lopez Garcia. Angel runs That Strange Show, which is a podcast. It's a lot of fun. These guys do a little bit of the news, they do a little bit of a topic, and they have a whole lot of fun. It's a lot of comedy, off the cuff comedy stuff that's fun. And he says Trilogy of Terror. It was one that my mother loved, and we watched it a bunch when I was young. Trilogy of Terror is a fun movie, especially the one with Karen Black. If that's the one you're going back to, probably it is. I think. Scott Workman says Earthquake. My mother was pregnant with me while seeing this in the theater with surround sound. Apparently, I reacted to the vibrations and kicked her throughout the movie. Oh, wow. Trent Owen says, a movie with a special place in my heart. I mean, I have movies like Freddy's Dead that I got to see in the theater with my cousin when I was really way too young to be going. It is one of those movies that at the time you needed to see in a theater with other people to get the full effect of how fun it was. Yeah, I think wasn't Freddy's Dead was in 3D, right? Or they tried to make it in 3D, and it was more of an movie experience than a really great story. I even like it though, man. I gotta be honest with you. I'm a softie, and when it comes to these franchises like Nightmare on Elm Street and especially Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, and Halloween, those three, I like all the movies in the franchise. I don't care how bad they are. I still watch them repeatedly for some stupid reason. At some point in my life, I'm gonna realize that I've spent, thousands and thousands of hours rewatching movies, not just watching movies, but rewatching movies, right? And that I could have spent those thousands and thousands and thousands of hours watching other movies that were. You guys thought I was going to say doing spending time with my family or something like that. No, watching other movies. That's what I should have been doing with that time. I got to learn to start writing stuff down so I don't rewatch everything all the time. All right. Greg Bench says Nightmare on Elm Street 4 is my personal favorite, The Dream Master, not because it was the first in the series for me, not the best in the series. That is a tie between the first and Dream Warriors. Dream Master was first viewed at a friend's birthday party. There was only a select few that were staying over that night. It was autumn of 1990, seventh grade. I avoided the Nightmare series because of my overactive imagination. Freddy always freaked me out, and he gets you in your sleep. As a child and pre-pubescent boy, this messed with my head ever since the playground discussions from 1984. Freddy was the perfect monster to scare kids, and he was successful. So I know we watched a comedy or action film before Freddy, probably a police academy film. Once the film started, the other three guys, including Jason, the guy with the birthday, fled the room to play billiards. They were too freaked, so they acted tough and said it was dumb and walked out. Well, not I. I was glued to the television. So I sat in the dark room by myself and Jason's older sister. She obtained the film and was there to prevent us from causing trouble or burning the house down. Jason's mom worked second shift, so she wasn't home. Now, as we watched it, she got freaked out too, as I did. She asked if I would sit next to her. Ooh, where's this going? Of course, I did. One, I was freaked out. Two, I was 12, and here's an older girl. And three, I wanted to look tough. This, I was not, but still made the attempt. Even though this was the only time I sat this close to her, I knew nothing would happen. I still felt like the big dog. My friends teased me about it afterwards and teased Jason about me being his future brother-in-law, but I conquered my fear of Freddy. Sure, I did have nightmares and a constant fear of him for a few years, but it was a fun film and that only enhanced my love for horror. And although I was in the friend zone, this experience would be recreated several times throughout the years. Scream, Hellraiser, Fright Night, Psycho, Halloween, etc. I was the man when it came to having a woman grab a hold of my arm to protect them. It is a great experience. I too get wrapped up in the story and jump or get freaked, but I'd be that gullible guy that would protect the final girl, only to be taken out by my hopeful innocence of being close to the opposite sex. All this I could owe a debt of gratitude to Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, The Dream Master. That was the story. That was very vivid. Um, yeah, I love that stuff. Now, like, I got a story. It's not anywhere near as good as this one, but it's hilarious. Uh, so I had a friend. I had like one friend who was a horror movie buff when I was growing up, like me, and we tried to see whatever we could together when it came out. And when New Nightmare came out, I think I was probably, let's see, that came out in 94, I believe. So I'm like 14 or 15 years old then. So me and him, we go to the local theater to see this. And I don't remember, like, we're sitting about halfway in the seats, right? And the theater back then that we went to, you got a large popcorn, you got a free refill, right? So, of course, man, we hammered that large popcorn before we were 30 minutes into that movie, right? We were both big guys. And so we always had a order of like I went to go get the refill and then he went would go get the next one or whatever. Sometimes we'd eat 3 or 4 buckets of popcorn sitting there. And I got up. It was my turn to go first. I got up, went to go get the popcorn, got it, came back. And when I came to the door, I was pissed already because I was into the movie and I didn't want to get up and walk out and go get the popcorn. And the guy was being a douche, nerdy guy with the glasses and stuff with the little gold vest tuxedo. And I'm like, come on, man, give me the popcorn. So I go back through and it's totally dark in there. It's a dark scene in the movie. I think it's the scene where Freddy is like up under the covers, right? And with the little kid. And so as soon as I come in, I notice there's something crazy going on screen. I start watching the movie again, right? And I'm also kind of like eating the popcorn and I'm walking down the how, I don't know if you guys have theaters like this, the big stupid steps. What's up with those steps, right? Not the ones that have the regular steps, but they have like we're going to make this step like 4 foot and then we'll make the next one a foot. And we'll, so I'm already having trouble, I'm trying not to fall, but I'm also not as interested in my footing as I am the movie. And I kind of, you know how like when you come back into a dark theater, you find your crowd and you make that like bam, that connect dot thing, and then you walk to that point. That's what I did here because I was very vested in the film. And I get down there and I sit down and I'm sitting there watching the movie and I take this huge bucket of popcorn and I pass it to my buddy and I'm just like engrossed in what's going on here. I'm not paying attention. And eventually, at some point, about a minute, maybe 2, 3 minutes into this, I realized that I'm still sitting here holding this popcorn and he's never grabbed it from me, right? And just, just out of curiosity, just see like, is he asleep or what? I turn and look and my buddy's not sitting there. It's two very attractive older girls that go to my high school, right? And they are both kind of like just looking at me. And I look down, like 2 rows in front of me is my buddy. I missed it by that much. And he's just, laughing his ass off. And the fear and all that set in instantly on me. I jumped straight up in the air. And when I did, excuse me, jumped straight up. And when I did, the popcorn hit the chair arm, of course. And when it did, it went everywhere, all over me, all over these girls. I slinked away down to the seat 2 rows in front and just like slid down on the seat and watched the rest of the movie while everybody laughed at me, right? And so that was a great experience I had with New Nightmare. Also, and my friend was a funny guy. Like I'm funny, but this guy has that dry, deadpan sense of humor, right? And so, like when we were up there getting sodas, there's this blonde chick in line with us, and she turns around real quick, like that, and like bumps both of us. And John was sitting there holding the soda, and the soda like splashes out, goes on him a little bit, and or it misses him a little bit there. And the girl turns and looks at him. She goes, "Oh," she's like, "I'm sorry." She's like, "Did I get you?" And he goes, "No, but you almost got Luther." And she looks at him, I swear to God, dead in the face, and says, she looks at him dead in the face, and then she turns and looks at me and says, "I'm sorry, Luther." I swear to God, that's not a dumb blonde joke. That happened to me. He looked at her. She said, "Did I get you?" He said, "No, but you almost got Luther." She looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, Luther." uh, I don't know if that's appropriate or not to tell that joke, or it's not a joke. It's true. It happened. So I don't guess it matters if it's appropriate or not, if it's the truth, right? And so our next comment here, ham granada. Oh, ham grenade instead of hand grenade. I get it. I couldn't read it. He says Hardware 1990 is my favorite horror movie. That's an interesting pick. Hardware 1990. I think that's the one that's got Dylan McDermott in it, right? Pretty good film. Doreen says, what other movies did Rob Zombie do besides Three House of a Thousand Corpses? Oh, the Three House of a Thousand Corpses movies, Devil Rejects, and the third one, which I can't remember. I think it was called Three from Hell, the name. And to what other movies did Rob Zombie do horror-wise? Well, he's done a lot of stuff. Well, not a lot. I guess that would be false. Lords of Salem, of course, and he did 31, right? Those were the other ones that he did. Of course, and then Halloween and Halloween 2, you got to count those too. I didn't see those mentioned in your list there, but yeah. And Anthony's giving me like a like he's laughing so hard he's crying thing here. And so our last couple comments here on the page or on the group. David James Parker, that's Mr. Parker, right here on YouTube. This is a cool dude, man. He does a show every Wednesday where he just runs through a ton of movie reviews. I think he does Patreon, and he has Patreon people on there. Like his patrons, people who support his show. We do Patreon too here, by the way, which I'm supposed to mention every show, but I never do, unless I'm reminded. And Tony Konopka, that's a good segue. Tony Konopka just happens to be one of our patrons. Tony donates like $5 a month, and we totally appreciate that, man, along with the other people who donate and keep the show going. We appreciate that. And David James Parker, anyway, says Day of the Dead. It's been my favorite movie since I was around 10 years old, and it's the rare film that has always been great to me, no matter if I was 10 or 34. The messages seem to ring more true every year. Oh, yeah, man. I understand what you're saying there, Dave. Day of the Dead is very much a story that proves human beings will be assholes no matter what happens in life, right? It doesn't matter if there's 8 billion of us or if there's just 8 of us, right? Someone is going to take the leader position. Someone is going to try to force something on somebody else. Somebody's going to do this. We're always going to be assholes when we're together to some extent. And it's almost depressing in that sense to me. I really love, I can't remember the guy's name right off the top of my head. I love Day of the Dead though. It's my favorite of the first three. I totally agree with Dave with that comment. Uh the helicopter pilot, that whole monologue that he does when she kind of gets pissy with him, and they're all sitting around having a drink and she gets pissy with him. That monologue that he does right there is one of my favorite in horror movie history. It's absolutely brilliant. And our last comment comes from Tracy Pugh. Tracy says, Amityville Horror, 6 years old at the drive-in theater, watching from the back of a Ford pickup truck. That had to be awesome. At the drive-in, watching Amityville in the back of a pickup truck had to be awesome, right, guys? Uh, so let's talk about some of your favorites, guys. What's some of the movies that have really touched your heart, and or really hold a special place in your heart or memory? Steve Morgan says Devil's Reign. Sounds interesting. I'm going to tell you guys. Here's one for me while we're waiting to see if we get any more comments here live. I'm going to tell you one. I actually got a liver transplant when I was 2 years old. I had a genetic disease called biliary atresia or biliary atresia is what I'm going to call it. Biliary atresia. I'm not exactly sure how it's pronounced. Uh, but that's what it is. And what it is it causes the ducts, the bile ducts that in your liver not to form right, and you don't, create bile right, and you poison yourself when you eat. But anyway, I had to have a liver transplant. It took them like 2 years to figure this out, by the way, and I almost died in the process. But after I had the liver transplant, I was just a little boy. And they told my mom that there was a good chance I wouldn't be able to play sports. I wouldn't be able to go to school. I wouldn't be able to do any of the things I've done in my life. And they were wrong. And I was completely normal. I'm very lucky. Most people have to take medicine for the rest of their life. I don't even take medicine anymore for it. Uh, it's been 30, let's see, I just turned 41. It's been 39 years now. I've had someone else's liver inside of me, and I've been alive like that. And the liver is actually 3 years older than me. And that's a funny story, too, because when I was 15, when I was 18, I used to try to tell the clerks at gas stations that I should be allowed to buy alcohol because my liver was 21, right? But they didn't always think that was so funny. Anyway, yeah. So like I lived in a small town in the country, and it was a big story there, right? It was a big story. This is 1982. Not a lot of people are going through all this stuff, and there were a lot of Christian people in that town who turned out to be not so Christian. They were offended by what my mother had chosen to do, that she took me to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to the children's hospital there to let this German doctor, Dr. Starzl, come in and do this transplant on me that he was doing around the world. He was like the leading expert in it. And they were like calling her the devil and all this stuff. And we were going through all this stuff right now. After I had the transplant, it kind of died down. But they didn't do laser surgery back then, guys. And to this very day, I'm not going to show you because I'm still insecure about it. But to this day, I have a scar here, a scar here, a scar here. Probably like I have more stitches, more scars than anybody I've ever seen in my life. And I've seen a lot of, you know what I mean. Every time I would be out somewhere, somebody would say, "I've got more." No, you don't. I mean, I probably got like 1,000 scars just on my stomach and all the little puncture things from tubes and all that. So it was very important to me when I was a kid to stay in really great shape, right? Because that kind of offset it a little bit. But when I was little, I couldn't do that. And so what some of these jerks decided to do was they sent their kids. I mean, it died down a little bit after I had the surgery. I'm like 2 years old then. So by the time I get to kindergarten, I'm 5 or 6 years old. And by the time I really was like, aware of other kids and they're aware of me, we're like in first and second grade or whatever. And so these guys, these Christian people, these really sweet people, they were sending their kids to school and telling them to call me Frankenstein because got a body part from another person and I'm alive, and also because I have all these scars on me. I don't know how if that was part of it, if they knew about that or what, but yeah. So it's when it first happened, I didn't even know what they were talking about, right? Because I'm just real little, and I go home, and at this point, my mom worked and my dad worked, so my grandma was there in the afternoon to take care of me, and I told her what was going on and what these people were saying, what they were calling me and stuff, and she said, "That's don't worry about that." And she broke out. She was a big Universal fan. Of course, I could have known that then. I was 6 or 7, 6 or 5 or 6, whatever. And she had a box full of Universal tapes that we ended up watching all of together at one point. But she had all the Abbott Costello Meet the Wolfman, Frankenstein, everything from that era, Dark Shadows, every Alfred Hitchcock Presents. She is a major reason that I came to love horror as much as I do because she gave me the base coat, right? And she broke out Frankenstein. We watched it together. And when it was over with, I was a little upset, but at the same time, over the years, it healed, and I started to realize I am a lot like Frankenstein because here's one of the funny things about that. Right now, at first they thought that I wasn't going to be able to do all these things. I wasn't going to be able to go to regular school. I wasn't going to be able to play baseball. Anything contact I wouldn't be able to do. But my dad was a big, strong guy. My grandpa was a big, strong guy. And when they gave me what they gave me after the transplant, which was basically steroids, prednisone and cyclosporin, heavy doses daily, um, I grew into a fucking monster. And by the time I was like 13 years old, there nobody in that in even in the high school could beat me arm wrestling. I was bench pressing 300 pounds by the time I was 16. I was a fucking monster. I was a problem for people. You know what I mean? And so I kind of took it on like that, though. In my mind, I'm like, I'm Frankenstein. I'm back from the dead, bitches, and I'm stronger than you. So in my mind, it was a way to turn it against them. And so that's a very Frankenstein's the first horror movie I ever saw, and it means more to me than any other movie ever could or ever will. And he was an anti-hero for me. It was somebody that nobody understood, and he couldn't be accepted by people for the way he looked or this thing that had happened from him. Years later, when you move away from a small-minded place like that and you see the rest of the world, you meet actual people who have intelligence, and none of those things ever cross your mind again. It just doesn't. It's just out the window. You don't even worry about it. You're not self-conscious about those things anymore because there are people out there who are good people and they don't want you to feel that way. So Martin Fleming says Blackula is another one for him. It was on late night TV one night when my big cousin was babysitting me and my sister. She let us stay up to watch it. My sister and I were in tears when my parents got home. That's awesome, man. So, guys, that's all the comments we got, though. And one thing I wanted to throw in there, another one of my favorite movies, The Silence of the Lambs, just had its 30th anniversary on, of course, Valentine's Day. It was released Valentine's Day, 1991. It's still it is probably, let's just be honest, my favorite movie of all time. Even though I've seen it so many times, I've gotten into this thing where I started a couple years ago trying to pick it apart just because that's the way my mind works. And but Real Talk with Wesley Jones, I told you guys they're trying to get their 10,000 downloads. They have an episode coming up about Silence of the Lambs, and it's going to be amazing. They're going to have all the information in there that nobody's ever talked about, or I won't say ever talked about, but the information that people don't talk about, that who Hannibal Lecter really was based on. And it's not Ted Bundy. It's not anybody you think. Watch the show, you'll find out. And they're going to talk about the backstory of the movie, and they're going to give their opinions on the movie, and it's going to be a great show. So make sure you tune in for that. Guys, tune in for Gag Me with a Knife. Drops every Wednesday. If you like slasher movies, check that out. You're going to love it. It's Emily Dunlap and Alex Pearson. Of course, we got our buddy Dave Becker, who does Land of the Creeps. I mean, it's worth listening to for Dave Becker. I'll say that. And because Dave always has some great insight and stuff like that. I mean, the other guys are fun, but Dave is like the man. He is a genius. He is the horror movie wizard, right? So check that out in Horror Movie Podcast. He's on Considering the Cinema. Guys, if you have something you want plugged, let me know. when we do these lives, or we'll do a show together, and I'll help you plug your channel, and we'll get you some more subscribers. I'm always down for helping anybody. Uh, if you're planning on starting a podcast, let me know. I'll give you some shout outs. I'll promote the hell out of it for you. I have a huge following on Facebook, Twitter, all these places. I can make sure some people will show up if you're starting something. If you're having a party, if you're having a horror party, I'll get my friends to show up. I promise that. Guys, that's all we got for tonight. I loved hanging out with you. Oh, wait, we got one more. Martin says, neither of us got a night's sleep for days. She's talking about Blackula, just a memory that connects to a film. And Pure Keenest says, my favorite horror movies are Night of the Living Dead, Halloween, and Night of the Demons 1 and 2. All right, guys. I had fun. Great stories, man. Very inspirational stories, I thought. And it really shows you how movies connect. A lot of people look at horror movie fans with kind of look at them down their nose, right? Because it's not dramatic enough for them, or it's not funny enough for them, or whatever the hell it is. It's not enough for them. The truth is, horror has the best stories. It creates the greatest human condition stories, right? Where you see humans put in these rare situations that they're probably never actually going to be in, and then you see their reactions. And I think people connect to that. There's a ton of reasons to connect to horror movies besides the fact there's people going around killing each other with them. You have those movies hit you. It's not just what's on screen, it's what's happening to you in your life at that moment, right? And I think we've had a few people say that tonight. I think that's the best way to end this. And guys, we will talk to you the next time. Got something worth talking about. Bye.